Classic Sonic, classic Sonic, modern Sonic? There's something that all of these versions of Sonic have in common. And thanks to recent development by the brand new Tales Tube video that just came out, it seems like there's a lot more in common with these Sonics than some people would have liked to have thought. Here's a hot take. Did you know that classic Sonic and modern Sonic are actually the same? To the average person, that probably makes a lot of sense. But to the Sonic fan base, that is not so clear. And in my opinion, I think there's a classic Sonic contradiction. So before we get into all that, please subscribe to the channel right now. I'll give you a second to do that. And hopefully you guys have on notifications so you don't miss any other videos from me. With that being said, let's get into the classic Sonic contradiction. So who is classic Sonic? Well, classic Sonic was introduced in Sonic Generations back in 2011. This isn't really complicated stuff. Everyone knows this. So in the plotline of Sonic Generations, a time eater discovered by Eggman shortly after the defeat in Sonic Colors was used to distort time and space, making Sonic of the past meet Sonic of the present, and he has to race against time to save his friends. After Sonic and Sonic defeat the Time Eater, classic Sonic eventually returns back to his original timeline, which should put an end to everything, right? I mean, makes sense to me. That was always my theory for the Sonic franchise, but it gets a lot more complicated, and here's why. Yeah, so I'm sure that that's an announcement that haunts Sonic fans to this day. With the announcement of Sonic Forces and the inevitable plot of Sonic Forces and some confusing dialogue within the game, it seems that there was a lot of contradictory things and some backlash from the fan base that threw a lot of people off, especially people who have their own headcanon theories and stuff like that, which is abundant in the Sonic franchise. And this left a lot of people confused. If Sonic meets Sonic during time travel, and then once again in the future meets himself during time travel, doesn't that create some type of paradox within a timeline? It has been said throughout many forms of media where time travel is present and just overall theories of time travel in general. They say that you're not supposed to meet yourself when you are time traveling. What happens when you meet yourself? They say that this can create a paradox, this can create alternate timelines, this can rewrite the past. All of this is very good theories. So here's the main theory about, so what happens when Sonic meets Sonic, goes back in time, comes back in time, and then meets Sonic again? Don't you kind of see where this is going and why this gets a little bit more complex? Well, let's dive into a theory. First, we're going to dive into the pretext for all this discussion, which I guess would be the new Tales Tube episode, which now canonizes the modern Sonic timeline.
You probably mean this little guy, right, Knuckles? I like to call him Classic Sonic. That's how Sonic looked in the past. This one here, that's the Sonic he grew up to be. Now, as to why there are two Sonics running around, it's complicated. Tails, you've been researching that. Care to explain?
Right. So, a little while back, Dr. Eggman and his younger self used an ancient being called the Time Eater to mess with all of space-time. The Sonic of the past and the Sonic of the now had to team up to defeat the Eggman. Eggmans? Anyway, as usual, Sonic and Sonic saved the day. We said our goodbyes, and Classic Sonic safely traveled back through the dimensional portal to his own time. Sonic even makes time travel look easy. This next question comes from, Knuckles. Again. He asks, I mean, why isn't everyone freaking out about this? Multiple Sonics? If there are two of them, could there be even more?
Well, Classic Sonic only appeared because of Dr. Eggman messing with the time stream. There should only be that one, right?
Not necessarily. Time is just one dimension of reality. Within the endless possibilities of space, there could be an infinite number of other Sonics out there.
So that probably should settle it, right? It's like, all right, there's one classic Sonic. He grew up to be modern Sonic. So that should settle it, right? Like there should be one classic Sonic and he grew up to be modern Sonic, which I guess is true. And that was always my theory. But with Sonic Forces, it does leave some room for discussion because they don't really even address that in the Tales Tube. And it's because it's complicated. Like this is something that is not easy to have a definitive answer to. Now, before we go into what Tales Tube says, we're going to do a little bit more research on some alternate theories theories, as well as just figuring out, like, is this classic Sonic from a different dimension? Like, what is this classic Sonic? Was there a split in the timeline? Let's give you that theory as well. So this thread on Twitter actually brought up a really good point, and it was kind of my theory, or at least it like made more sense of the timeline post Sonic Forces, post Sonic Mania, and let's explain. So every Sonic game that's ever happened that's considered canon happens before Generations. Sonic Generations happens due to Eggman messing up the timeline splits. Modern Sonic goes on to Sonic Lost World, classic Sonic goes on to Sonic Mania. After these events happen, Sonic Forces obviously comes after Sonic Lost World. Classic Sonic comes back during Sonic Forces. This is just like, if you didn't know that, classic Sonic returns in Sonic Forces. And then once again, after classic Sonic is sent back to his dimension, he goes back into Sonic Mania Plus, because that's what happens after Sonic Mania. And then Sonic continues on to experience whatever happens after Sonic Forces. So essentially the theory is that, you know, once you meet yourself in time travel, it's going to cause some type of a rift. If classic Sonic meets modern Sonic in Sonic Generations and goes through the entire history of Sonic, how does he go back into his timeline and then re-experience all the events again as if he didn't know what happened? Doesn't that not make sense? Like, if you've experienced everything modern Sonic has experienced and you go back to your own timeline, wouldn't that cause some type of disruption? Doesn't that not really make sense? And not only to make it worse, he comes back into the future again a couple years later to experience Sonic Forces with the Phantom Ruby, which is also present in Sonic Mania as well. How does he then go back to his timeline again and then re-experience all the events that happened? Like, he like simultaneously time travels multiple times, but in Sonic Generations he doesn't recognize him. Like, it's just one big cluster, you know what, of events that don't make sense. How does Eggman discover the Phantom Ruby in Sonic Forces but not recognize it from Sonic Mania? And vice versa with classic Sonic and modern Sonic. How do you meet yourself twice in the past and then experience all of the same events over and over again? At the very least, the canon is a little bit disruptive. I know Sega had recently hired a lore manager, if you guys look right here, that wants to ensure that the universe is more meaningfully connected. They want to make the universe of the games, comics, and the TV shows and everything like that a little bit more connective, a little bit more cohesive, which in my opinion is why they're doing some of these Tales Tube events to kind of connect that lore. They've brought on Ian Flynn, who writes for the comics, to kind of write for the games. He's also a consultant for Sonic Prime, so they are trying their best to have one person kind of mastermind all this together, but it seems to be a work in progress. But here's also another statement from Sonic Forces, which kind of threw a lot of people off and kind of gave them this alternate timeline theory as well. Let's roll the clip real quick.
That makes sense, I think. Do you know how you got here? Maybe the power that somehow affecting other dimensions, which might work to our advantage.
So if you guys listen right here, Tails says that he's a Sonic from a different dimension. Is he a Sonic from a different dimension, or is he just a younger Sonic? Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because that's where it kind of gets unclear. And now, if he is the younger version of Sonic, like, is he a Sonic from a different dimension, or is he the younger Sonic? If he is a younger version of Sonic, then when does Sonic Mania take place? Does that mean that Sonic Mania also takes place in between some time of Sonic Adventure and Sonic 3 and Knuckles? Is he a Sonic from another dimension? Like, I don't understand this, and I think that's the problem that a lot of people have, and that's where that two timeline theory really does originate from. Well, let's see what Ian Flynn, who kind of is like the Sonic lore guy, has to say about all this, because maybe he'll have a better idea of this classic contradiction.
Last I heard, the 30th anniversary classic Sonic comic, or at least the first story, wasn't canon to the main book, but rather the classic universe, specifically post-Mania. But now the continuity gurus need to know.
We need to know.
Canon to Sonic Mania, the game, or a new IDW exclusive classic Sonic timeline separate from the one seen in the games?
I just consider classic one thing right now. So classic stories happen in the classic universe, and don't worry too much about the classic timeline.
All right. Worry not about the timeline. You're telling people to not worry about the timeline, Ian. I don't think that's
I'm worried about it.
It's not going to work.
As time goes on, that mantra just gives me more and more comfort that everything is canon.
Everything is canon. Okay. All right. So yeah, even the de facto lore master of Sonic currently doesn't really have a good answer for us right now. I mean, that was 8 months ago. So right now, the current answer is this version of Sonic, classic Sonic, is now modern Sonic. If you guys look right here, this is Sonic Mania Adventures. This was right after Sonic Mania happened. So he just goes right back into it. So how does he not know what ends up happening in the future? How does he come back into the future, not know who modern Sonic is? Like, how does all this happen? When exactly does Sonic Mania take place? Does it take place in the future? Does it take place before Sonic Adventure? And the classic Sonic games are canon. Where are Mighty and Ray? Where have Mighty and Ray been for the entire duration of the franchise? Why were they friends with Sonic back then and we haven't seen them since? Maybe this opens up room for discussion for the future. In my opinion, I believe that this is something that's a work in progress. I think this is something that's going to take some time to develop. Ian Flynn says not to worry about the canon, but I need to hear from you guys what you guys think down below in the comments. Do you think there's a classic contradiction, or do you think we shouldn't worry as much? If you think about it, Blaze the Cat has also appeared in Sonic Rush, but it seems like her origins are also kind of retconned in Sonic 06, so it's like that also deals with time travel. A lot of time travel, a lot of sticky stuff. It doesn't seem to be as one-dimensional and as easy as some people in my comments have made it out to be after that Tales 2 post that I made. So in your opinion, what is the definitive timeline for classic Sonic? What is the definitive Sonic timeline? Do you guys think there's a contradiction? Like, are you guys as confused about this as I am? Let me know if you have a definitive timeline down below. Let me know if you have any thoughts about this, because I feel like this answer is going to require a lot of people brainstorming, bringing our thoughts together. And let me know if you think there's a classic contradiction or if I'm just being crazy and I need to go touch grass.